Well, good afternoon, my friends. I'm Erica Lukes here with Expanding Frontiers, and it is a lovely and cold night here in Utah. But you can bet that I've been not staying out of trouble. So, Jack Brewer and I are digging into things as we always do. And you can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to check out all of the wonderful work that Jack Brewer is doing. There's a great video from world renowned archivist and historian Barry Greenwood. You can check that out to learn about the importance of archiving, and you can also donate to our nonprofit, which we appreciate. It helps keep us able, in a position where we can do FOIA requests, dig into things, and do the exposés that we have done and that we are currently working on. And you can bet that 2023 is going to be an incredible year. So I want to thank all of my friends who are here in chat. Always, all of you guys, I am so happy to see you here every weekend. Ken and Sean, Amy, Jim, Peter, of course, and Simon and Amy. And I mean, just anyway, you guys are all from all over the world. It's so cool to come into the chat and see you here and to know that you support this show. And are respectful in chat. That means the world to me. You guys have been through a lot with me, and we are finding the truth, and it's been a bumpy ride. But tonight I'm going to be interviewing somebody that I have actually, over the years, come to respect greatly. James Carrion is with us tonight, and James is a voice he is not afraid to tell it like it is, and I respect and appreciate that about James. He was the executive director for MUFON for some time, and actually during the days when Bigelow was involved with MUFON, and that's an interesting story in and of itself. You can go back to UFO Classified and listen to some of the other interviews I have had with James over the years. He earned a degree in Russian language and international affairs at Florida State University. He's a former intelligence analyst for the U.S. Army, all of which contributed to his research interests in Russian espionage, the Cold War, and how deception and UFO reports factor into the complex circumstances. And this is fascinating for me. I love it. He's a historic forensic researcher and respects quality standards of evidence and relies primarily upon such sources as authenticated documents. Imagine that. Newspaper clippings and declassified records. Through this lens, he has done numerous presentations and published substantial material, much of which is freely available to download. And you can go to historydeceivedblogspot.com. So without further ado, James, welcome to the show. It's nice to see you again. And I love your backdrop.
Hey, Erica. I appreciate you having me on.
No, absolutely. It's going to be fun. And so what have you been up to lately?
Honestly, I can tell you it's primarily work. I do computer work, so that's been keeping me very busy. Haven't had a lot of time to do much of anything else.
Well, I mean, but that's okay though. Because every time you come back to the UFO subject, it really nothing has changed, right?
You know, nothing has changed. You can, if you look at this subject, you can go back 40, 50 years and, look at some of the old UFO organizations that were around and what the public discussion was around UFOs and investigations that were being done and government interests. And it pretty much mirrors what's happening today. It's really nothing has changed. There's nothing new under the sun.
And doesn't it amaze you how people just keep reinventing things and pulling out more stories and it's like we're not willing to look at the history of the subject, and that's one thing that Barry Greenwood has been very good at teaching me about is the importance of the history, because it's everything plays out just like it does decade after decade the same way.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I wrote a recent blog article and I titled it "The Great UAP Reckoning," and it was really about the National Defense Authorization Act that President Biden signed recently back in December, and the legislation, what was approved into law surrounding this new office that was formed within the Department of Defense, and also mandated by law this historical report that they have to create and release 540 days from the time the act was enacted. So I guess that puts it roughly around middle of June 2024, 540 days after the act was signed. And So I wanted to write about that because that really intrigued me, that finally we have basically the full weight of the US government behind trying to put into historical context, all the way back from the very beginning of the modern UFO era, what their own interest in the UAP subject is, UFO subject, right? So here they have to self-document basically what their interest was, all the way back to the very beginning. This is even pre-Roswell. This is back to the ghost rocket days. And it's funny because I had an online discussion with some folks on Twitter because they kept pointing to, I think it was some rumored article that came out regarding Jacques Vallée, pointing to some UFO crash in 1945 as the reason as to why they wanted to date it back to that time frame. And I think, again, we have rumors and innuendos that lead the discussion, but there's no substance behind it, right? There's no documentation, there's no paper trail, there's no official, discussion around it. It's all rumors and innuendos that sort of bleed into UFO noisephere through the usual suspects of either UFO journalists or some of these figures that have been in ufology forever. But they can all talk without providing evidence of or proof to substantiate their statements. And so, that intrigued me. That's the reason I wrote the article. But going back to what you were just talking about history repeating itself, the thing is that what you'll notice is throughout UFO history, the focus from the very beginning has always been on the noise, right? Mm-hmm. My interest has always been on the signal, right? What is the signal within that noise? And what leads UFO discussions, what the media pursues, what all the figures in the UFO field pursue is simply whatever's the newest and greatest noise. And all it takes is one person to just generate more noise to focus the attention in that area, whether it's alleged whistleblower or the usual suspects like Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon, or they use their media contacts like Leslie Kean or George Knapp. They're all pushing noise, and that focuses the discussion. And that's always been that way throughout UFO history.
And that's so sad. And I know in your blog you mentioned, that it really is unfortunate how this does distract from something that is important. And, it's like we're looking at all these grifters over here shouting about A, B, C, and D and getting their time on the lecture circuit and on mainstream media, which is just amazing to me. But then, it's like we don't, where is the actual, when can we study this without having all of these grifters involved?
Yeah, absolutely. But it also not only focuses the noise, it sends all of these people down these rabbit holes where they spend all their time and they spend all their energy arguing online as to whether or not this rabbit hole is valid or not valid, whether it's backed up by whistleblower testimony or documentation. To me, it's very reminiscent of like when the MJ-12 documents were released. And you had UFO researchers like Stanton Friedman and Dr. Wood and his son. They spent all this time trying to validate those documents. So somebody sent them down this rabbit hole where there's really no end to it, right? Because they can't prove one way or another whether the documents were valid or not. And the same thing's happening today where all it takes, again, is somebody to just create some new noise and send everybody down that path, and everybody willingly goes down that path. Now it's the Admiral Wilson documents or notes and all the discussion about that. It's just this nonstop stream of noise.
And that like when you step back and you look at it, when you're not like so enmeshed in it, it's just like, how this is ridiculous. It's like it's the same thing with Skinwalker Ranch. I mean, I was in it, I bought it, I did all of these things, and now that I've stepped back and done research, in a broader perspective, it's just like I cannot believe I ever gave any credence to a story like that. And that is to be said for most of the things. Well, I mean, a lot of them in UFO history, they're not factual. And I do think the 1945 thing with the Trinity case is interesting.
Yeah, unfortunately, no paper trail, no official documentation. I think when you really look at it, the majority of people in society are noise consumers, right? They enjoy the noise. It intrigues them. It excites them. They like watching cable TV channels where all of this noise is portrayed. And I think for a lot of folks, in the end, they don't really care so much whether or not it's noise or it can be proven, or whether or not they're just intrigued by it. Like they like the excitement. They like to be in the middle of it. But for some of us, who are real true, we're truth seekers. We want to see an end to this, right? We don't want this thing perpetuated from now until eternity. We want to know whether there's truth behind this or not. Some people don't care. Some people are perfectly fine with just perpetuating it forever. As long as it generates the excitement, or it gives them the number of clicks that they want, or the views they want online, or it lets them make the rounds of the UFO talk circuit, or be recruited for talking head positions on cable TV shows. They're perfectly fine with that, and I've never been satisfied with that.
And it's unfortunate. I just found out a new little tidbit about Utah travel and tourism, which I find very interesting. If you are a travel influencer, you can go to specific areas, and our travel and tourism board will pay you to promote specific areas. And so I just want to throw this out. I wonder how many of the people that you now see surrounding Skinwalker Ranch and traveling there and doing their little adventures are perhaps getting funding from the Utah Travel and Tourism Board.
Yep, exactly. Yeah, in the UFO field, there's typically a money angle for a lot of the people that are perpetuators, and who like to generate the noise, because the noise brings them income, brings them money in some form, in some stream. It's one of the reasons why, when I took all this time to do individual research, and I wrote a couple of books I decided, I'm not going to charge for these books. I'm not going to get them published. I'm going to put them online, make them freely downloadable, because I do not want someone to look at my research and say, you're doing it for the money. You're only in it for the buck. I haven't made a dime off of this research. I'm doing it for one reason, and that is to get to what the real truth is. And unfortunately, there's a grift in this field. There are a lot of folks that are in it for because they like to look important. They want to be on TV. They want to be invited to conferences. They have a personal stake in it, or they do it for ego. And bottom line is, they're doing it for the wrong reasons. At least that's my opinion.
It is interesting to see kind of the mix of people in this subject, and people that are particularly prominent on the UFO lecture circuit and things. And sometimes you just wonder, were these, what what were they missing in their early adulthood? Well, because everybody seeks to find a group where you're accepted. I've done that. I've met incredible people, and as I'm sure you have, that have been involved in this topic, and I do believe that there is something that should be studied, but it is really sad to me that it is caught up in all of this. Just a scam. And that's why, and I've just had Sean Drew just say, is this channel a skeptic debunker channel? And I want to say, no, I'm invested in, so is Jack Brewer, so is Barry Greenwood, we're invested in the truth. And for me, I don't particularly care to be lied to and led down rabbit holes by people who are making money hand over fist promoting a project that is absolutely the most ridiculous project on the planet. And same with Trinity, and same with Serpo and MJ12 and all of these things. It's ridiculous. And I've got to ask you, why do you think people like Hal Puthoff and Kit Green and that whole crew, why do they still get airtime?
They get airtime because they're pushing a narrative that is it's exciting for a lot of people. It's basically, hey, we're trying to show you that there's something to the angle we're promoting, that there's intelligent life that possibly has visited us, but that's never been proven. There is no proof of that, but it's what folks want to believe, right? They would like to believe that, and I would like to believe it too. I'm not a debunker. I'm not trying to say that it's impossible that alien life has visited us. It is completely within the realm of possibility, both in the past, the present, and the future. But where is the proof? That's what we really need, is the proof. And the problem with a lot of these folks like Kit Green and Hal Puthoff is that they have one foot in the UFO field and one foot in the intelligence field still. So we don't know what kind of narrative they're pushing if it's for valid reasons, or they're being fed a line that then they regurgitate to the outside world. We don't know that.
And I mean, do you think that their involvement in the intelligence community is as profound as they've led us to believe for decade after decade?
No, no, I don't think, but I do think that when an intelligence agency wants to push a narrative, they'll use whoever is at their disposal to do that. And whether that is a Kit Green who has experience, with the CIA for a number of years, or it's someone that Kit Green has become a mentor to in the UFO field, and I know individuals like that, or it could even be a politician. I mean, that's the thing that my research has shown. If you go back and you look at what intelligence agencies are capable of, especially when it comes to deception, if they want to push a narrative, all they need to do is find a willing participant and give them the line that they need to share with the public. And that individual doesn't even have to know why they're saying it. They're doing it either out of loyalty, or they're doing it for one of their buddies in the intelligence field, or for whatever reason. But the bottom line is that they are basically just a pawn in a game that they themselves don't understand. And there are folks that do understand it, and that's what I'm hoping that this 1945 report will show, because by law, they're supposed to dig deep within all the intelligence agency vaults, and they're supposed to find every occurrence of when an intelligence agency used the UFO field for self-serving reasons, right? Either for generating noise for counterintelligence regions, or perhaps they were using it to cloak a secret project, whatever the latest stealth fighter was back then, or for just experimenting on the public. Can they manipulate minds? Can they manipulate society? There's a lot of reasons why this field can be used that has nothing to do with alien life. It all has to do with very mundane reasons.
And I mean, I think that's so true. And it's interesting, over the years, I've talked to people who just think, why would anybody even bother with the UFO community? I mean, it's ridiculous. And that seems like a conspiracy that any of these intelligence agencies would be attracted to or use or manipulate, people in the UFO community. And I'm just thinking, to me, this is like a hotbed of testing. If I were, and if, I mean, you're sending out somebody new in the intelligence community. Hey, what a great place to train.
Oh, absolutely. And you can even see traces of that when you look back, let's say even like social media, pre-Facebook, where they had UFO, groups online that were chatting about the latest UFO case. And you can see how people were influenced into believing things. And I always questioned who's behind these sock puppets that were involved, because sock puppets aren't a new thing. They were around during those times as well, when you had anonymous folks get on bulletin boards or discussion groups and start posting, and you have no idea who this person is. It could be somebody sitting at the CIA. It could be somebody sitting in the Kremlin. You don't know. Whoever it is was saying, hey, there's this new online forum for us to figure out if we can manipulate beliefs. Can we manipulate people's minds? And you see that steady progression from back then to what happened during the 2016 election, where all of these foreign accounts were used to manipulate the minds of American citizens in terms of who they're going to vote for. I mean, it's truly that deep. It really is a continuation of that.
And it's amazing to me that people don't want to realize that. It's like we're willing to only scratch the surface and then believe what some of these anonymous sources are saying. Follow the dangling carrot over here and there, and then go down these rabbit holes. And I understand the need for people to try to find, purpose, to try to feel like they're on the cutting edge of things and figuring things out. But it's like when you look at Cambridge Analytica, when you look at some of these data mining, companies, it's really frightening. And it is no doubt that we are where we are in the world. And the UFO community is, that's like front and center for promoting conspiracy belief systems, and people that are, oh my gosh, FEMA's coming, they're going to round you up, and don't trust the government, and, stockpile your guns and ammunition, all of these things, and it's been very cleverly over the years kind of woven together. And then you
Right.
get people like,
Absolutely.
Stuart Rhodes or people like that can tap into conspiracy theorists, and that creates some real dangerous narratives, as we've seen.
But I think the problem is that short-sighted goals often have long-term implications. And so when you have an intelligence agency, whether it's domestic or foreign, that is experimenting with online media to manipulate beliefs, that conspiracy that gets bred can invade and be made pervasive throughout a larger population, as we've seen in recent years, right? Which is very scary to see how many minds can be poisoned with so little information online. And so it's a two-edged sword, because while you're playing around and experimenting with these things in whatever your intelligence agency goals are, the backlash to that may be that you are undermining the very democracy and country that you're living in. And we can see that having played out in the last couple of years. How many I mean, I don't know if you remember when the QAnon folks, that large crowd went down to Dealey Plaza in Dallas because they were expecting the return of JFK Jr.
Right.
And I'm thinking, how can you be so dense as to believe that is a reality? But you have enough people that create that mass hypnosis and that mass cult-like following where they believe things like that. And that a lot of that starts in the UFO field.
It absolutely does, and it's been interesting to me, especially to see people like Elizondo and his hit crew, whatever you want to call them, that hide behind anonymity again, or just go out and they're like rabid dogs. I mean, I hate whatever. I don't. they've attacked me enough, so I don't care. I'm calling it what it is. But I think it's really sad that you've got people that like Elizondo, who's very skilled at manipulating people, obviously, and who can pull people in that have, that are, I'm sure, very good people, just like the QAnon thing. People that are good people, that have families, that have careers, and they are, attracted to something where they're feeling validated, and that gives them a sense of community that maybe they didn't have. And as a result, slowly but surely, these they're seeded with ideas that are, half truths and misinformation, disinformation, and that can be a very powerful tool, as we know. And that's a tool that's been used, for hundreds of years, thousands of. I mean, it's just the way it is. But we have to make a concerted effort in the UFO community to step back and say, wait a minute, let's not get on UFO Twitter. There's no benefit to being on UFO Twitter, because there are a handful of people that are leading a narrative, and they're bullying other people, and it's a really ugly place.
Yeah, I think we also have to look at what we call the UFO community, because truly the UFO community it's a religion. It's basically self-serving. There are people that are attracted to it because of their beliefs, and it's belief that rules, not evidence, not data, belief. And I'm sorry, am I echoing a little bit here?
No, you actually sound pretty good on my end.
Okay, I just want to make sure. Maybe it's just I'm hearing my own feedback through the audio here. Um, so when I left MUFON, for example, which was back in 2010, I made a concerted effort to break with the UFO community, because the UFO community itself, far and large, is not made up of truth seekers. There are people that are in it because it meets their own beliefs. They like to get together with other folks that are like-minded. You don't dare question their beliefs. It's kind of like going to church on Sunday and then walking up to the minister and say, I have proof that Jesus Christ, it was a man. Here are his bones in a bag. And even if you presented the real physical evidence of what you have, it doesn't matter, right? Because it's a belief that they have that you can't possibly prove as wrong, right? Because it's preconceived, it's already built into their system. The same thing happens in the UFO field, and within the UFO community. So I made a concerted effort just to break with that, and to just pursue my own personal research, and try to make sense of all of this. And what I found out through my own research is that there's a common thread that's in ufology, in UFO history from the very beginning, and that simply is human deception. And so my research was based on that. And what I found out very quickly is I was researching how deception is used by intelligence agencies and how it was used during wartime, is that you're always, as a person who's practicing deception, you're always looking for your opponent's weak point in terms of what their cognitive dissonance is. Because when it comes to deception, you are your own worst enemy, right? Once they find out something that you have a preconceived belief about, they will focus on that and they will manipulate that so that you come to believe that you have stumbled upon something that's the truth, when in fact it's just manipulated belief. And I think that is what intrigues me, because I spent a lot of time in the two books I have writing about the breadcrumb in the historical trail of that deception and showing how it has precedence back to World War II, and some of the same parties that were involved deceiving the Axis powers during World War II were also at the very beginning deceiving the world about what flying saucers were back in 1947. And I'm intrigued by this historical report that's going to come out, because I would like to be proven wrong. I would like for them to say, okay, we've looked in all our archives, we looked through all of the intelligence agency vaults, and this is what we came up with. And if it matches none of my research, I'll say, okay, then I was wrong, right? Time to just throw in the towel and say, admit that I was wrong about that. But that's assuming that they actually do the job of investigating and going through those archives and doing a good job of it. When I look at this recent report that came out at the end of the year, that everybody was, or came after the end of the year, everybody's really wanting to see this UFO report, and how poorly written it was and how it gave no data. It makes you wonder, what is that historical report going to look like? That they have to produce 540 days from December 23rd, 2022. What is it going to look like? Is it really going to be a concerted effort like the Church Committee report was, where they put all these investigators and they had to go into intelligence agency archives and figure out what the wrongdoings of the intelligence agencies were back then? Or is this just going to be a whitewashed effort and we're going to be back to square one? That's the part that really intrigues me.
Well, and I think it's fascinating as well, because you do see that manipulation. And I think I would like you to get more into like the early stages of the UFO subject and how that manipulation played out.
Sure. Yeah. If we so when I started my research, I thought, okay, I'm gonna probably start around 1947 when Roswell happened. But then I thought, wait a minute, I need to go back a little further. I need to go back to 45 and look at the Cold War and its effect on people's thinking, and also how the intelligence agencies were formed. A lot of folks don't know a lot about intelligence agency history. So back in 1945, the war was ending. The intelligence agencies that were in place then are not what we have today. There was no CIA in 1945. That didn't happen until 1947. There were the intelligence agencies of the different military departments. And back in 45, there was no Air Force. So basically what you had were intelligence agencies that don't exist today, but their records are still out there preserved somewhere. And that's one of the interesting things I found out as I went to the National Archives, is I could not find a lot of these early records. So for example, when I went to send a FOIA request to the Central Intelligence Agency, to the CIA, and said, I would like to see the records of the Central Intelligence Group, which is your predecessor, they said, you have to go to the National Archives. That's where they're at. So then I went to the National Archives, and what they told me, no, you have to go to the CIA for that. So it's like they're pointing fingers at each other saying they have the record, no, they have the records. And where are the records? Those records exist somewhere. And that's what I'm hoping this historical report brings to light, is what those records are. The other thing that we don't have any documentation of, and I think every intelligence historian that you talk to will actually confirm what I'm saying, is that if there are deception operations that were perpetrated by our government or some other government, there's very little record of that. A lot of what was deception based, a lot of times did not get written down. Maybe it was discussed in meetings, but there's a poor documentation trail for that. And it's one of the big problems that intelligence historians have with just being able to write their histories, right? Not being able to document those periods. So what my research shows from 1945 to 1947, and folks can go to my blog and they can download these books, has all of the source material in there with all the references, is that in the very early days of ufology, of the modern UFO era, we created, when I say we, I would say our government, probably the allied governments of the US and the UK, created the UFO myth. They didn't think that people were going to see it as UFO myth. It just sort of evolved into that. They were trying to trick, as my research shows, they were trying to trick the Soviet Union into believing we had advanced weaponry that they did not have. And that got all mixed in with aliens and, flying saucers from outer space and from Venus or whatever else. We created. I'm pretty sure I'm pretty confident based on my research that the U.S. and the U.K. governments created the UFO myth. I could be wrong, but I'm hoping that's what that 1945 historical report will show.
And I really think so as well. And so when you look at like NICAP and you look at that organization, you look at the history of NICAP, I mean, what are your thoughts as to the intentions of the organization?
Yeah, so Jack Brewer did an excellent job researching that. And what he shows is that there were a lot of CIA folks, former CIA folks, that were on the NICAP board or actually affiliated with NICAP, including Roscoe Hillenkotter, who was the very first director of the CIA. So what I'm thinking is that they were, again, using the UFO field for intelligence agency purposes, maybe recruiting retired military members or former intelligence community personnel to be part of that group because they have a counterintelligence purpose to it, right? They are interested in knowing what foreign governments have interest in. What are the Russians and the Chinese looking to do in terms of our UFO knowledge? Because they know, they're not dumb, they know that probably a lot of what's flying around our atmosphere is not alien, it's probably high-tech stuff that we have. And so there's a counterintelligence purpose to that.
And so, I mean, do you think that were there any people involved in NICAP or some of these other organizations that maybe had a political bent to what they were doing?
I don't know if there's a political bent. I would think it's like whatever right-wing anti-communist bent there was at the time. That's probably the extent of the politics that were there. So it is right-wing, and we probably see echoes of that today in the UFO field and those that surround it. It's very much right-wing, but I think back then it was very different. I think back then men were of a different character than they are today. I mean, we can look at the halls of Congress and say half of the folks that are in Congress would never have stepped foot on the beaches of Normandy, right? They can barely defend the truth, let alone pick up a rifle and defend the country. So it's a different quality and character of person that existed back then than it does now. Still, there may have been politics involved. I'm not going to deny that. But I think today politics are just so jaded and so, polarized that people are using it for their own selfish gains, not the country's gains. Back then, I think it was probably more they were looking out for the country.
And isn't that sad? And I think that you have a lot of, I like what you're saying. I mean, I do believe people were a little bit much more respectable back then, and they maybe did have, right or wrong, a belief that we needed to defend democracy and our country. And now, unfortunately, things are so skewed. We have this idea that we're defending democracy by, overthrowing our government. I mean, I don't know. This is a very strange time. So.
Well, we were using, I think back then we were using conspiracy in defense of the nation because we were facing a much more formidable foe, which was the Soviet Union. Today, politicians use conspiracy to further their own selfish agendas. So there's no shame for a politician to spew conspiracy left and right. Right? For them, it's just par for the course. They're just there to figure out how their poll numbers are going to do, how they're going to be able to get more social media, traction, whatever it takes comes out of their mouth, whether or not it's hurtful to the country or not. It's the unfortunate part of today.
I know it really is, and I mean, just I'll go back to the UFO Twitter thing and seeing some of the vile, hateful rhetoric that is on UFO Twitter and online in general, and it's unfortunate. And again, how do you know whether this anonymous person, is somebody from Russia, or it's somebody from, our own intelligence community, or somebody who's just living in mama's basement who is a nasty, negative human being? But it's a whole new world out there.
Yeah, absolutely.
And so
Yeah,
I
it's
wanted, go
go
ahead.
ahead.
Sorry, no, you go ahead.
No, I just wanted to say that when it comes to politics, whether you're on the left or you're on the right doesn't, I don't think really matters as much as whether or not you're willing to use conspiracy as a method to an end. That to me, that is the dangerous part of of conspiracy. Conspiracy in and of itself is going to be present, right? Whether it's in small cultural groups or larger cultural groups, really doesn't matter. Conspiracy will be around with us forever. But when you have people in positions of power, whether on the left or on the right, who are willing to use conspiracy to further their own ends, that is the double-edged sword that will kill this country. And unfortunately, we are seeing that. And I think exposing conspiracy in all of its, wherever it's at, right, in all corners of society or government or within politics, it needs to be exposed. And we cannot accept that conspiracy rules. And that is the problem we're having today. Conspiracy rules. Just turn on a cable TV channel. You'll see it. The cable companies don't care that they're spewing falsehoods 24/7. Whether it's on the Travel Channel, which I have no reason why it's called the Travel Channel when it should be called the Ghost Channel. When it's nonstop paranormal central 24/7 of stories that cannot be confirmed by the consumer. That noise, that conspiracy is dangerous. And then you just extrapolate that to Ancient Aliens and Skinwalker Ranch and all of these other shows that they don't care about truth. They simply want viewership. And unfortunately, the public are, as noise consumers, are giving them what they want. So the cable channels give them what they want. But in the end, it hurts us all as a society.
Absolutely. And I think, I know Sean is commenting in chat, and I want to just read you what he said, but he said, "We know which way this guy leans now, don't we? Erica, is leftism a prerequisite for your guests?" And I will say that I've had, let's see, how many years have I been, almost 10 years, I would suppose. I've been doing shows, and 95% of the people on are leaning to the far right, that I've given, I've interviewed, but there is something, whether you're right, middle of center, left of center, whatever, there's a problem here. And it starts with conspiracy mindset. And the majority of the people that were there for the insurrection, I'm sorry, last time I checked, they were leaning a little bit right of center. So I'm bringing on people that are trying to expose truth, who are trying to say conspiracy isn't the way to go because it's ruining our country. It has detrimental effects when you go down those rabbit holes. And so I don't know if that's my prerequisite for getting somebody on the show, then I don't know what to say. I'm trying to find truth, and truth is not in promoting a load of garbage, really.
Yeah, I guess my answer would be, am I on the left? Absolutely, I'm on the left. I make no apologies about that. But that's because I see the right embracing conspiracy far more often than the left. And, I'm focused on truth. I'm anti-conspiracy. So if I'm anti-conspiracy, of course, I would be leaning towards the left. Now, if the left decided to do this, try to endorse and embrace conspiracy at the same level the right does, then I'm sorry, I would have to, move away from the left and move towards the center. But the bottom line is that conspiracy doesn't have politics. People have politics. And, when folks figure out what the winning formula is for getting into power, for winning votes, for making people afraid, they'll use it. And that means a lot of times using conspiracy, because conspiracy oftentimes breeds fear. I mean, who knows that better than the Nazi Germany, right? Always demonize the opponent. and make folks, give them a demon for them to focus on. And that's a conspiracy. So sorry, but truth is what matters. Politics do not.
I mean, and that's absolutely true. And like I've mentioned on my show multiple times, I was a Republican delegate. I have, I mean, I am the kind of, I'm the person that wants good over evil. I'm the kind of person that wants somebody that has a moral compass, as compared to somebody who doesn't. And what I see with people that go down this rabbit hole is something very dangerous. So I don't even know. It's just funny to me that we can get so riled up about this when all we're trying to do is talk about the truth. And I would love to invite any of you guys on the show, and we could have a thoughtful discussion about this. And it would be interesting to see what you say. But if people can't even understand that what took place on January 6th was a threat to democracy and an insurrection, then I don't even know what to say. I'm not quite sure where you're getting information from.
Yeah, I think I go back to World War II history, to the Greatest Generation, when politics were not so polarized and we were all in the same boat, literally storming the Normandy beach. And, people who died on that beach were conservatives and liberals and anybody who was a good American, right? And this is all about being a good American, right? Loving your country, not your politics, not your party. And, being accountable for the truth. Again, if we go back to the intelligence agencies, I find it so ironic that if you were to go into the CIA today, their motto, that I think is in their foyer, that's on their floor, says, "You will know the truth, and the truth will set you free." And today's society is a society that needs to be set free. And the only way that's going to happen is if we have real truth. Not the truth according to George Knapp or Lou Elizondo or Chris Mellon or Tom DeLonge or whoever else really thinks they know the truth, but in fact, they don't have the whole picture. Only then are we going to really, as a society, say, okay, we are free. We know what's signal, we know what's noise. We know what our own government did to deceive us, right? How they use this subject for their own purposes, assuming that they're going to do the right thing and actually produce a historical report that's worth the paper it's printed on. That's the bottom line. I don't care about noise. I don't want to hear more noise. I don't want to go to a UFO conference. I don't want to watch a UFO show anymore. What I want is simple truth. And I think a lot of people do want that. Those that are more, they're more concerned about the mystery, or they're more infatuated with the mystery, I think they're going to be disappointed if there is an end to this subject. I've said this so many times before. There's a reason why we don't have leprechaun conventions, but we have UFO conventions, right?
I would like a leprechaun convention.
Nobody believes in leprechauns. Nobody's pushing leprechauns. The TV shows aren't, making shows about leprechauns. Well, it's also the US government and other foreign governments aren't using that for their own noise generating purposes. But for this particular subject, they are. And, I find it so interesting also that people have a problem finding or actually looking at the breadcrumb trail that's in place. And even though it goes back to something like this office that the Department of Defense is creating, you can follow that breadcrumb trail all the way back to Skinwalker Ranch.
Well, let's do that. Let's just break that down there.
All the way back to Skinwalker Ranch.
Bring it on.
All right.
I've made it like 44 minutes, kind of.
So, a lot of people will say, oh, that 2017 article that came out in the New York Times, that's what set it all off. No, it didn't set it all off. What set it all off was when the DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency, decided to muster up $22 million and give it to Robert Bigelow on a sole source contract to investigate UFOs. Allegedly because some DIA guy was there at Skinwalker Ranch and had some alleged experience that intrigued him enough to push it in Congress with Congressman Reed and others. But I was there at the very beginning of that, right? I went to Bigelow's headquarters and negotiated the UFO investigation side of that and part of MUFON when I was director. And it was also that same year that I went back out to Skinwalker because there were certain things I found out that just didn't settle with me, that seemed to be off. And Skinwalker is a myth. I'm sorry. I don't care how many folks love the show and think that there's something to it. It is mythology. There's no truth to what's happening at Skinwalker other than what people want you to believe and what you've been manipulated to believe. And we can see that in the show. You know, it's funny because before the show, it was that the first book that came out was Hunt for the Skinwalker. You could read that as a horror novel, right? That kept people up at night when they started reading all of these intriguing stories that were on paper, but for which there was no evidence. Now that we have a show that's doing all these hokey experiments that absolutely prove nothing, right? Can Skinwalker be exposed as the fraud it is? But even with that, even with shooting rockets up in the sky and so-called radiation readings and dead cows and all of this made-for-TV crap that they throw out there, they have zero evidence that anything that goes back to that book can be proven. Instead, we just have lies and we have manipulation and we have deceit, which is par for the course for any intelligence agency. And lo and behold, yeah, we had an intelligence agency that started all this, the Defense Intelligence Agency. And I know that because I was there at the very beginning. And when I asked John Schuessler, who was the director at the time, I said, John, whose money is behind this? And I asked Robert Bigelow, whose money is behind this? Is there an intelligence agency behind this? Well, John said, I have a security clearance, I can't tell you. And Bigelow just lied to me and said, no, it's not an intelligence agency. He wouldn't tell us who, but definitely not an intelligence agency. So sorry, guys, deception 101. The common thread here is deception. And so Lou Elizondo and Chris Mellon and all of these other jokers that are out there making the rounds of the talk circuit on national TV, nobody's focusing on the fact that what got this whole ball rolling was deception. That's the truth.
Absolutely.
Anybody has proof otherwise, feel free to email me and show me your proof.
You know, and with regard to Skinwalker and Bigelow and that deception, what do you think? Do you think it was just a way for that crew to, you know, instigate a grift? Were they just trying to get money to do Lord knows what? Or were they purposely steering a narrative for the intelligence community?
It could be a combination thereof. But because on the one hand, it could be there's an intelligence agency narrative behind it. Why Bigelow, who's an alleged multimillionaire, needs $22 million more dollars? I don't think he needs an extra $22 million. I don't think there was a grift for him. Maybe he wanted some space contracts and there was a sweet deal he got out of that with NASA. I don't know his motivation. And I don't know if he knows how much an intelligence agency is behind it. But again, this is the one thing I think a lot of folks need to understand. If you see red flags popping up in the UFO field and you ignore those and you focus only on what sounds juicy and what sounds exciting and you ignore the red flags that are there, then you're doing a disservice, because if you can't explain what those red flags are, then you shouldn't focus on the noise. You need to look for the signal. And the first thing you need to do in looking for the signal is explain what those red flags are.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting to me, and it's funny to see how people are you know, in chat. There's some I don't know, interesting people that have listened to my show for a long time, and they're clearly bothered by the fact that anybody would go against Knapp and, you know, his brilliant reporting. I mean, to even go there. But, you know, here you've got a gentleman who over the decades has promoted more mythical nonsense than anybody. And this is a guy who's supposed to be an award-winning journalist that doesn't have any ethics. And it's absolutely amazing to me. I mean, how many, you know, leaked documents can we talk about? I mean, that, first of all, if you've got a leaked document, I would think that you would be maybe behind bars. You know, why in the world would you be leaking documents for decade after decade and promoting false stories like Bob Lazar that can clearly be, you know, you can look all of that up, and it's, why do we keep giving these people any, you know, air? It's ridiculous to me.
Yeah, it's you're absolutely right. And the thing is that I really don't care if people get upset that I'm pushing back against the noise. It's the noise that has created the UFO stigma. So when we hear all this stuff about, oh, the UFO stigma, we're trying to counter that by making UFO something that can be talked about in public and on TV without this laugh factor. But in reality, the noise that surrounds it is what creates the stigma. When you go to a UFO conference and you have folks that are supposedly presenting data, but then out in the hallways, there are people getting their aura read, or there's a psychic who set up a booth. I'm sorry, that's the noise, the stigma that surrounds the subject. And when you have people pushing narratives that cannot be proven over and over and over again, whether it's underground alien bases or it's so-called secret programs, space programs, and some sort of Mars travel, or we have this secret exchange program with aliens, or all of this so-called inside knowledge, whistleblowers, or whatever. None of it can be proven. It's noise. Show me something that can prove it. I'm on board with it. But if you're upset that I'm pushing back against the noise, I'm sorry. Enjoy your noise. I don't care about the noise. I care about the signal. What is the real truth?
Right.
It goes back to that X-File episode where the couple's coming back from a date and they get abducted on a country road by two gray aliens, and then in the next scene, another UFO comes down and abducts the whole group of them. And fast forward later in the episode, and the two gray aliens are unmasked as U.S. Air Force personnel. That explains exactly what's happening now, where if we don't know what's noise and what's signal, you'll never get to the truth, ever. If we don't know the government's role in the UFO field since the very beginning, we'll never get to the truth. So that's why I think, again, I'm heartened by this report that by law should be released around middle of June 2024. Because to me, that's signal. That's what I want to look at. I don't care about the noise. I don't want to hear about Skinwalker or ancient aliens or anybody else that has all of these stories that they're pushing without proof. Let's take a look at a real signal here. And that means first our government coming out and confessing to what their involvement was. What I find real interesting though, Erica, is that if they fail to do that, how do we know what our adversaries are going to do? What happens if, given the opportunity to set the story straight, they fail to do that? Well, do we know what Russia's going to do? Do we know what China's going to do? Because they have a stake in this game too. If you can imagine, if we go back to 1945 to 1947, if the U.S. government created the UFO myth and they did it because they were trying to hoodwink the Russians, I don't think the Russians are going to feel too good about letting that just pass. I think they probably will come out with something of their own to say, yeah, we were aware of that. This is what we know in our historical record of what happened back then. Or maybe not. I don't know. It's just going to be intriguing to see. I think it's exciting to be alive at this time and to finally be able to get from within the realm of government, this level of information that would have never made it to the light of day before, ever.
Well, that's good that you're excited about living in this period of time. You've been,
No,
you've been one of the
absolutely.
few
Yeah.
people that I've known that is, because everybody else is just like, oh, this is an interesting, kind of a dark, for some people, period of time. There's a lot of, it's very tumultuous, for sure. But that is true that we should have accountability and some level of transparency and I absolutely, I have to ask you because when you mentioned like Russia, it has been interesting to me over the years to go back through whether it's UFO magazine or different books by authors who've been on the circuit for decades. But, here they are going to Russia in 96. Here they are meeting with this, all these different people. And I find that connection with Russia very fascinating. What do you make of that? Are these people that are truly trying to find out about UFO sightings in Russia, or is there some deeper agenda there?
Well, there are folks that are going to be in it for true reasons. In other words, they're looking for truth as well. Maybe it's truth based on their own beliefs, which is fine, right? They're going to go to Russia. They're going to interact with Russian investigators. What are the latest UFO sightings? But then Russia has its own intelligence agencies that has a stake in this game as well. So we don't know what the level of infiltration is there. Just like you don't know if you go to a UFO conference, how many of the folks walking around are true believers, or how many of them have day jobs at intelligence agencies, right? Everybody has their own personal agenda here. And I've been to enough UFO conferences to know that there are intelligence agency folks walking around there, right? They can see that this field it can be used, whether it's to train their own person out or train their latest mind control techniques or social manipulation techniques. They have an interest in it. I mean, I think that just makes common sense. So I think our adversaries is the same thing, right? So we don't know what's happening on that side, but we do know that they have similar interests.
And so, what would, if you were at a UFO conference and you were scanning the crowd to figure out if somebody was potentially in the intelligence community, which is always a fun one at a UFO conference. But I mean, how would a person discern that, or could they?
I don't think they could. I think if I saw somebody at a UFO conference that had a military crew cut and was wearing very heavy shoes and boots that look like they're FBI agents, that doesn't mean that they're in an intelligence agency. I would be more concerned about the guy in the corner that's wearing Bermuda shorts and has a straw hat, right? Because if you're an intelligence agency person, you're going to go incognito. You don't want anybody to notice that you're there. You don't want anybody to know your agenda, right? So there's no real way to recognize who these folks are. It's just the fact that you know that they're there because it makes sense that they're there.
So, do you think that some of the people embedded, and I know that this is like going out here on a limb, but I mean, do you feel that some of the people that are speaking at UFO conferences and have been pushing, book after book, could potentially be involved in the intelligence community?
They could not. But I do know enough people in the UFO field to know that, people all the way up to the very top of the organization, like, John Schuessler at MUFON, was a friend of Kit Green's, right? Those were his inside sources. And when you have people in the UFO field that are cultivating inside sources, right? Maybe it makes them feel special. It's an ego-driven thing. Maybe they're really just looking for real information. But I think the bottom line is that when you have something that is a government program that's highly classified, a inside source should be suspected, right? You don't get a security clearance for no reason, and you're not going to just start blabbing because you feel altruistic about what you're experiencing. So that's why I think that the Lou Elizondos of the world and the Chris Mellons of the world, their backgrounds and their reasons for supposedly pushing the UFO agenda to Congress, it just stinks. There is nothing there altruistically that makes sense. Folks with security clearances, anybody who's been in the intelligence field, I know because I was an intelligence analyst for the Army for 4 years back in the 80s. I had a top secret clearance with an SCI investigation. And it was embedded in your mentality. It was something that was imbued in you that you do not open your mouth about anything that is classified, period, no matter what. Now, can there be exceptions? Sure. You have, for example, the Edward Snowdens of the world that said, well, screw that, I'm just going to divulge what I know. But that's an exception. When you have a number of people that's come forward, like Elizondo and Mellon, and this guy from the CIA, Ramirez, and this other guy from the CIA, I forget his name now. He was a former counterintelligence guy, all coming forward, all saying, hey, we got to get the UFO subject out there because it's important, right? We have to get rid of the stigma. We have to make everybody in Congress start talking about this. Sorry, that doesn't make sense. There's some agenda there. There's some con going on. And I think a lot of people are starting to see that there's a con going on. And the question, we don't know the reason for the con, but it is going on. When you have, Elizondo being caught with all of these sock puppet accounts that he had on Twitter, pushing different agendas. I mean, come on, folks, that's a big red flag. What does that tell you? Why can you not pay attention to that? Then maybe you're being led down the primrose path and it's not where you think it's going. But folks are so easily deceived. So,
And like with all the sock puppet accounts, I mean, I found that really interesting. And there was a person that was rumored to be, a sock puppet account for Elizondo and things, and now there's a person that's come to light behind that, and it's just like, oh my lord. But I mean, what's should we be asking for people to be truthful about their identity when we're dealing with people online?
oh, absolutely. Anonymity. Okay, let me put it this way. When I was in MUFON, I was often approached as the international director by someone who said, I will tell you things, but I need to remain anonymous. And my answer was absolutely not. If you can't put your name out there publicly, I don't want to hear a thing you have to say. Because if you're trying to use anonymity to hide behind, that is a red flag, right? Even Edward Snowden, who came forward, didn't use anonymity to divulge everything he said, right?
Right.
He said, I'm going to flee to a foreign country and make my name public to be this whistleblower. But those folks that say, oh, I have an inside source, that needs to remain anonymous because they're going to be threatened, because they're in a position where they can't really make their name known. I'm sorry, anonymity does not hold water. It's a red flag, and it's only suspect.
And I love the way that we excuse so much in the UFO community. It's like, well, like you're saying, oh, he's got the secret source and he can't divulge his identity because people are going to come after him, and there are going to be these death threats. And it's like Lou Elizondo at these conferences, oh my God, he's wearing a bulletproof vest because he's so afraid of what's going to happen. And you just think, really? I mean, okay.
The graveyard of ufology is full of people who had inside sources that led nowhere. Yet they had no problem with cultivating those inside sources. And some folks were just laughed out of the field. I mean, look at Bill Moore and how he thought he could manipulate his inside sources. He ended up being the person manipulated. So I'm sorry, it just doesn't wash. It doesn't make sense. And it's really just common sense. It truly is. And when you're exposed to this long enough, you start seeing the patterns, right? You see the people that come forward, like when I was at MUFON, somebody came forward and says, hey, I have a ton of money that I want to donate to the organization. And, why don't you meet me at this secret warehouse in Kansas City and we'll talk about it. But you can't make my name public. Really? Seriously? It doesn't make sense, right? It's you're being manipulated. You're being conned. And if you willingly let yourself go that route, then you will be conned. You will be manipulated. And you're just participating in the creation of more noise.
And so when you got involved with MUFON, I mean, obviously that's a big commitment to be the executive director. Why did you first get involved with MUFON? And I mean, obviously how quick of a process was it for you to go from believing that there's maybe something of merit to questioning everything?
It really didn't take long. What happened, let me just go back a little bit. When I joined MUFON, when the organization moved to Denver, which was around, I think, 2004, 2005, I went down and volunteered at headquarters, and I saw all their, historical case files. And I said, hey, I can digitize these. We can get these, put in PDF format, searchables. We can give these out to investigators. And we can just open up what used to be a black hole of information, open it up to the outside world. From there, I got invited to join the board of directors. And then when John Schuster decided to step down, which was around 2006, I said, hey, I'll become director. This intrigues me. I'm really interested in knowing why people are still interested in the subject. And even back to a time when I was sitting at MUFON headquarters at a diner right across the street, sitting down with John Schuster and saying, hey, John, after all your years, you founded MUFON, right? You founded MUFON in 1969. Let's go back all that time from 1969 to 2006 was when we were sitting down together. What is going on? What is the truth? And he said, I don't know. And that floored me. That just intrigued me. That made me think, wow, how can he not know? How can all these people that have been recruited into the organization have PhDs and are doing research? How can they have no even small piece of the truth? How can they all just be basically running clueless and trying to make sense of something that doesn't make sense? So that just intrigued me. And when I became international director, I said, I got to change the paradigm here a little bit. We have to make this organization a hardcore investigation organization. So I rewrote their investigator manual. I started doing investigator training, field investigator training at the conferences. But what I really started doing was starting digging very deep into some of the cases that were ongoing at the time. And as I started touching these different cases, that's when I started seeing the hands of human deception involved. And I'm not talking about people making stuff up so they get more clicks on YouTube, because it didn't exist back then, right? Now people can use CGI and they can, make up fake UFO videos and fake ghost videos and hope to get 1 million clicks out of them. Back then, that was not the motivation. So when you started having these stories surface, like the 1953 Kinross incident that resurfaced around 2006, where this alleged dive company, supposedly found a UFO in the 1953 Kinross jet on the bottom of Lake Superior, only to find out that those people were anonymous. They were sock puppets, right? It didn't make any sense who was behind that and what their motivation was. Or to have somebody that came to one of our symposiums that use a historical case to try to resurrect a historical case, and made up this story and had these forged reports that they even put inside the MUFON journal saying, there's something to this. That person didn't pan out. So when you start seeing all of these human hands of deception, that's when it starts to click, right? Oh, wait, something's not right here. Something's going on here that has nothing to do with extraterrestrial intelligence. It has something to do on a human level. And and it didn't take long, from 2006 to 2010, 4 years later, I had already changed my mind completely about what the subject was about. And that's when I started saying, okay, I got to get out of the circus. There's too much noise. It's one of the things I think that really sort of pushed me out was the overwhelming amount of noise. And for some people, that's exciting, that's intriguing. But for me, it was debilitating. I couldn't focus on what the signal was because all this noise kept being generated, either bogus reports or bogus stories or anonymous folks coming forward or Skinwalker, all of this noise being generated. And I couldn't focus on what the signal was. So I thought, okay, let's leave the noise behind. Let's leave the UFO circus behind. Let me go back and just do my own research. And so I left in 2010. I spent the next 10 years doing personal research, digging in archives, really looking at history and what was happening back in the early days of UFOs. That's where my research comes from. And, again, I could be wrong. My research doesn't mean I'm right. I challenge anybody to look at it and to try to prove me wrong. And what's interesting is nobody in the UFO field has. Whether it's Stanton Friedman, and God rest his soul, who would never want to debate me in public about my research, or to Richard Dolan, who wrote these alleged histories of UFOs, but failed to mention any of the information that I've uncovered in the archives. Nobody wants to debate that. And that's fine, okay? Because really the people that should be debating that are military and intelligence historians, but they don't want to put their finger into it because there is no real meat behind it until this report comes out. So I can tell you, mark your calendars around June 15th, 2024, if this new office that got established, sticks to their guns and actually does the report right as they should, I think there's going to be a huge meltdown on UFO Twitter. That I definitely will predict.
Well, luckily, I won't be able to watch that because I don't go there.
Well, you should, because it's entertaining at times to see how the narrative gets pushed around by a small number of people on UFO Twitter.
Right. A small number of people that are, sporting some interesting tattoos and have definite, very, yeah, interesting views. And we look at Chupacabra and some of these lovely people who've been prevalent on UFO Twitter who are really questionable characters.
It's all noise generation. That's what UFO Twitter is. It's generating noise. And that's why when, if this report comes out and is done properly, I predict this meltdown over at UFO Twitter, because when the government puts the weight of their own words behind that report and say, okay, folks, here's the truth as we know it, assuming that they do the job they should be doing by law, I think there are a lot of people that are going to get their UFO bubble deflated at that time. And, rightfully so, because I don't want the UFO bubble to hang around forever. I would like to put this subject to bed. I would like to have UFO conferences end in 2024, and for folks to say, okay, all right, here's the truth behind it. And if there is proof that we've been visited and intelligence agencies have that proof, great, disclose it to the public. Everybody's ready for it. We're all adults here. No one's going to go, society's not going to implode if we find out that there was visitation. Just give us the truth, the unvarnished truth.
And so, obviously that's going to be interesting to see. And now there's a new push for people that they believe that there is something again around the corner, and new information will be coming to light. What do you don't think there's anything of merit at all?
If there is, no, I'm not saying there's nothing of merit. I'm saying that if the historical report that they're supposed to produce actually is done right, if they open up every highly classified vault and pull out any project that used the UFO field as cover for whatever, right? Whether it's to promote conspiracy or to cloak the latest stealth fighter, or to be used for counterintelligence reasons. Whenever they put that on the table, that doesn't mean that there may not be a signal in all that manipulation, right? It could be that they say, well, you know what, guys, back in 1953, we saw we have proof that there was a visitation. This is what we know about it. Could be. It's within the realm of possibilities. That's the thing, is that there are so many folks that think that if you don't push the alien narrative, you're a debunker. No, that doesn't make sense, right? There is life in the universe. Absolutely, there's life in the universe. Statistically speaking, there's life in the universe.
Right.
The real question is, have we been visited by that life? And does the government have proof that we've been visited? It's possible, but I would say a large amount of what's happened over UFO history has zero to do with visitation.
And so how has the intelligence community historically used civilians to go out there and look up in the sky and collect data for them?
I don't know if they're collecting data for them. In a sense they are. If you think about, like, for example, when I was in MUFON, we had somebody submit to the MUFON reporting system some strange vehicle they saw flying around. It turned out to be a highly classified aircraft. So I think they know that if you have civilians out there that are gathering data, and making that data public, as MUFON was, that you're making that data visible to our enemies as well. So there's a very much a counterintelligence part to this that I think is of concern.
And so, what would be, and I want to thank UFO John Doe, thanks for the super sticker. That's really awesome. But so you've got an organization like MUFON, and they're putting forward top secret craft. So what would their role be? Then they would go in and, dismiss what was taking place or discredit that?
Well, that's interesting, because I have a theory behind that, which is, I think the UFO organizations have been used and abused throughout history. And I think this recent setting up within the Department of Defense an organization that essentially hijacks the UFO subject on behalf of the government for them to take over the investigation, that may be purposeful. Because they can use that historical report as saying, hey guys, we're sorry, we did manipulate, we did manipulate society, we did manipulate the American people, we did infiltrate UFO organizations, and we did all of this. But guess what? We're still taking UFO seriously. We have an office dedicated to doing that because we think that there may be something there. We have to be concerned about aviation safety. So, slap us on the wrist, but at the same time, hey, we got your back. So I think it's this sort of two-pronged approach, which is we have to ask the American people for forgiveness, but at the same time, we can't just leave them empty-handed. We have to show that we're taking this seriously. So it seems crazy, but that to me is this sort of their approach here.
And so, what do you think about this new, means of data collecting? And I've heard little bits about it. I haven't studied it too much, but it sounds like a couple of the usual suspects are involved in that.
Which data collection efforts?
So
are you
it's the
mentioning?
new one that just came out over the past 2 days, and I know I should know this, and somebody in chat's going to help me with that. But it's apparently there's an anonymous source, a group that has come up, and apparently Alejandro Rojas and Brian Bender and Alex Dietrich are all involved in that, from what I understand.
I got to say, more power to them. More power to them. More power to the Galileo Project. More power to anybody who has an interest and wants to collect data and has an actual scientific protocol and for collecting the data and for analyzing the data. I think all that's great. There may be something anomalous that they catch. I go back to like when I was in MUFON, and MUFON had this ambient monitoring project where
Right.
they were trying to prove whether or not alien abduction was real. So what do you do when you're trying to create a scientific experiment around that? Well, they actually built these boxes that looked like, it's a standard box you have in your home, or it looked like a book. And within there was a bunch of scientific instrumentation that started collecting data about the ambient environment, right? What was the temperature? What was gravity? What was the air pressure? And it just sat there in these abductee homes collecting this data 24/7. And at the same time, they were telling the folks they recruited, hey, whenever you feel like you've been abducted, we need for you to journal about that. So if you had an alleged abduction at 8 o'clock last night, write about that. Because then we'll take the data we're collecting from the scientific box we put in your house, and we'll see if we see something anomalous happen around that same time. Something changed in your environment. That's scientific collection. And I think that's admirable. I think that's something that works because, we're not saying all of these abductees are crazy, that they need mental health, that they're making all these things up. People who have experiences, whether they're abductions or whether they're seeing lights in the sky or seeing craft, they believe that they're seeing something, right? So one can't discount their stories, but at the same time, in the absence of proof, if you're going to devise some sort of scientific experimentation around that, it has to be something that can be proved, with data. And that's what this ambient monitoring project was. And the most ironic thing about it was they collected data. And in the end, they never analyzed the data because they needed to take that data and give it to a statistician who would then try to make sense of it. And either the funding ran out or something else happened, but bottom line is the data never got analyzed. Well, then you have a scientific project that went nowhere. So if all of these new groups, as you're referring to, or the Galileo Project, where they're trying to put real science behind it, I got to say more power to them, right? Let them do that. Let them go and try to find that true signal. If they can prove it scientifically, it's great.
It's interesting, and you might have heard me mention this before in some of my shows, but when I was up at a conference near Skinwalker Ranch, there was a group of people involved on the show with Skinwalker Ranch that had, they'd created a device to put into people's homes who were, potentially being abducted or experiencing things. And it was interesting. For me, I wouldn't, now that I know what I know, I don't think I would be willingly, I don't know if I would want somebody that I don't know or necessarily trust to put something into my environment to monitor it. Who am I kidding? I've got an iPhone. Let's get real. But it's, they were doing that. They were selling the devices, and they were also asking for a monthly subscription fee to get
Oh,
your
so
own
so
data.
you had to pay for the device to be in
Right.
your house.
Yeah, and
I
pay for
see.
to get the data. So
Yeah. Yeah. Not very scientific to me.
yeah, it was interesting though. It was just very, yeah. I mean, again, you see people that are genuinely interested or feel that they've had an experience, and they go into this setting, and because people, you're on a TV show or you're in a position of potential power, you can get, these people can manipulate really good people, and I think that's a very sad thing. What did, when you were with MUFON, did that bother you at all to see how people were being manipulated?
Oh, absolutely. And being willingly manipulated. Or worse, not using good judgment when interacting with witnesses or alleged experiencers. Um, like for example, um, there was a gentleman who made all these claims back in the time when I was a MUFON of being visited by aliens, and he had videos of alien figures popping up in his windows. Um, and unfortunately, the MUFON investigators involved with that were also best buddies with this person. And it turned out that his claims could never be proven. It looks like he was conning everybody. But when you lose your objectivity because you want to be friends with the subject of your investigation,
Right.
or you lose your objectivity because you don't want to lose your inside source, or you lose your objectivity because you have an anonymous witness who you're protecting, it leads nowhere, right? It basically, you lose your credibility, period, in the field. You can't be trusted.
Absolutely. And I mean, I will be the first to admit that I completely lost my objectivity, with my little episode. But again, I mean, luckily for me, I was able to, just like when I was at MUFON State Director, it's like I could step back and then see, wait a minute, okay, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, and then eventually remove myself from that specific scene. But
Yeah, and it's nothing to be ashamed of because we've all been through that. And even myself. I mean, there was a period of time in my life where I was as wide-eyed a believer as anybody else, because in the absence of information, what do you have to go on but the noise, right? So if that's all you have, you're exposed to. Of course, you're thinking, "Wow, that's intriguing. There must be something to it. I don't know what it is, but it's interesting. It's intriguing," and I believed it wholeheartedly. And like I said, it wasn't until I became MUFON International Director and started seeing the human hand of deception playing out through those years that I became a more critical thinker. And I've seen people evolve, right? You've evolved, I've evolved, many people in this field have evolved. It's when you don't evolve and you're stuck that you have to think, okay, well, maybe you're not as much a critical thinker as you think you are, right? Because to be a critical thinker means to evolve. If proven wrong, great, I'll admit I'm wrong. I'm wrong, right? If I say something that I think is God's absolute truth, and somebody comes to me and says, "You're absolutely wrong. Here's the proof of why you're wrong," I need to man up and admit it. I'm wrong, right? And sometimes that has happened to all of us. So, I think I was even watching the other night on YouTube. I don't know if you remember, I forget the gentleman's name. His first name is Lou. He had this show called UCR, Unidentified Celebrity Review. And I have to say, I've seen Lou evolve within less than a year from a believer to someone who's using very critical thinking, to the point where he's like, "I can't do the show anymore." Right? I've been led down a primrose path that I thought was, the truth, but I can see now that it's manipulation. And it's interesting to see that evolution.
it is, and it's, for me, it's been disturbing and painful and empowering, all at the same time, to go through these, MUFON, all of these things, and to see that they're really, well, there are really no ethical standards in this subject. People who should be promoting integrity are promoting nonsense, and so it's really, it is sad. And you do look at the same people with, that have been, in the subject and promoting the same thing, and that are willing to, die on their belief system. That is sad, but I guess if you're vested into something so badly, you'll I guess go to your grave holding on to that belief system.
Well, and like I said, for some, it's not even a belief system. For some, it's just perpetuating because it's the fun thing to do. It's I don't know if I've told you this before, but I was down in MUFON, down in Roswell, at a conference, and Nick Pope was down there at the same time, and Nick said, "Hey, are you going to Albuquerque? I need a ride to the airport." So we get in my rental car, and of course, stupid me, had less than a quarter tank of gas, thinking I'm going to find a gas station on the way back to Albuquerque. We almost ran out of gas, and somehow we made it. But I remember in that trip, as we were discussing, as I had done a presentation in Roswell about my research, and we were discussing my research, and I said, "Hey Nick, why are you in this field? What is in this for you?" And he says, "I'm here to have a good time." Right? For me, it's all fun and games, right? So, which I guess was an honest answer, and that's fine. If that's the reason you're in this field, then great. But if you're in it for truth, that's a whole different reason. And I think you're in it for truth. I think Jack's in it for truth. I think there are a lot of people that are in it for truth, and that's what we want. We don't want the noise. We want the signal. Give us the signal.
Right, absolutely. And I think that is, yes, it can be fun and games, and you can go to conferences and hang out with people and, do the social thing, which is, I had some great times at conferences and meeting people and watching Robert Schaefer sing opera around the campfire and things. It's very interesting, but at the same point in time, it's like, we're putting so much of our life, we're investigating things, we're investing money, we're taking time away from our families, time away from our business, and we're not getting, we're not being reimbursed for this. So for me, I want the truth. I don't want to be manipulated, as I have been over the years from the Skinwalker crowd, and I don't want other people to be hurt who are very genuinely good human beings that deserve the truth. And so like I said, there is something that we need to study. And you, like you're mentioning, it's like you can't do that when you've got all of this noise. And so
Yeah.
do you think that there is hope that we could potentially actually get to doing good work and studying something phenomenal?
Yeah, I really think there can be. I think that if your heart is in the right place and you have the resources to do it, and you stick to the scientific method, because I think one of the slippery slopes that a lot of people who are in this field go down is when they say, "I'm exempt from the scientific method," right? When they say this subject is so anomalous, and really you cannot prove with data that these things are happening, they somehow exempt themselves from those standards, and it doesn't work that way. The rest of the world that operates on scientific principles, you can't have your subject, for whatever reason, somehow exempt from that. So I think, yeah, it's possible. You just have to stick to true science.
And we know that the prime example of that is not Skinwalker Ranch. That's great.
Absolutely. That's a Skinwalker's a joke. It's so horrendous to watch that show and to see how they butcher science. It's a butchery of science to the maximum degree. I don't know any other way of saying it. And the book that came out that Knapp and Kelleher co-wrote, there's no evidence behind that other than their words. But words, as we know, is noise, and noise is what rules.
Yeah, I will say that just when you thought the first book was good, and then you've got the Skinwalkers at the Pentagon, and just more nonsensical stuff. But I love people in the chat room are talking about dino beavers. That's, of course, everybody's favorite subject when you think about Skinwalker Ranch. But I want to ask you, and I'm sorry to go back to Skinwalker Ranch, but I think it's a really important lesson for everyone in this subject, because like you said, a lot of things start there and then balloon out. in the UFO community as a result of what took place back there when Bigelow had the property. But you met, Frank Salisbury, Dr. Frank Salisbury, who wrote the Utah UFO display, based on the cases of Junior Hicks. And you met Junior Hicks, as did I, and I was very excited to meet him. He was a lovely, lovely human being. But at what point did you realize that there was a potential that, like a lot of us in this subject, that maybe Junior had been manipulated by people?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. So Frank Salisbury came to the MUFON symposium in 2009. And right after that, I met with him in Utah to go to Skinwalker. We asked Bigelow if we could get on the ranch. He denied us access, saying he didn't want the publicity. So we decided to interview people around the ranch as well as in the surrounding community, because what Frank was doing, he was rewriting his book, the Utah UFO, the Uinta Basin, what was it called? The Utah UFO Display, about the Uinta Basin. So he was basically re-interviewing witnesses he had interviewed a long time ago to see if their stories had changed, to see if there were any new stories. And of course, Skinwalker, having come into folklore around that time, was part of his investigation. And so Dr. Salisbury knew Junior Hicks. We met up with Junior Hicks. Junior helped us talk to the neighbors that surround the ranch. But the intriguing things that Junior revealed, and this is, again, what sort of led to my falling out with MUFON, was that Junior was on an NDA. He was told, he signed an NDA with Bigelow saying he wouldn't disclose any information. But he told us confidentially that when he was on the ranch, there were these metal rods that had been found. And he was told by a NIDS, who was at the time was NIDS, a NIS scientist, who allegedly also worked at Area 51, that these rods were analyzed and that they were the same element that Bob Lazar had found at his alleged time at Area 51, the same element 114, I think it is. And that right there was a big red flag, okay? Because somebody at that point was making something up. They were trying to tie in the Bob Lazar mythology into the Skinwalker Ranch mythology. And I thought, okay, huge red flag. Something's not on the up and up here. And so I think Junior was manipulated into believing that. But I think what probably actually made me think there was something more to what's going on at Skinwalker was Dr. Salisbury was able to find the brother of the former owners of the ranch, and who told us that in all the time that his sister had lived on the ranch, nothing paranormal had happened. That none of that started until the new owners came along in '96. But I think probably what was even more intriguing was when this guy, this brother of the former owner, got a call from Bigelow. So you have a billionaire, alleged billionaire, calling his doctor out of the blue, Garth Myers, and saying, "Hey, how come you told everybody there's nothing going on at this ranch? You know there's something going on at the ranch. You know there's UFOs. Why are you making up these stories? So why do you have a billionaire gaslighting this doctor?" That's pure and simple manipulation. It's pure and simple deception. And so when you have that level of manipulation going on, another huge red flag, something is not on the up and up here, right? There is something going on here that's nefarious. It's at a human level. It has nothing to do with the paranormal.
And, it's interesting, and you're speaking about Garth Myers, who received the phone call from Bigelow. And as I've mentioned on my show many times before, because obviously this is a topic near and dear to my heart and in the same state as I am, but Garth Myers was a pillar of the community. And it has been very sad, and you've got a blog about this, where you see somebody like Brandon Fugel, who was also by his own accounts a very stealthy businessman in Utah, and involved in the LDS religion. And you see him and his other the people that are promoting the myth that go out and basically slander somebody like Garth Myers And I think that's really sad. And that's very telling of their character. You know, I mean, I know that Garth Myers was my bishop, an amazing human being. Everybody loved this man in the community. He worked very hard as a doctor, and you know, the lying would be the furthest thing from his mind.
Well, it's more than sad. It's infuriating because not only did he slander uh, Garth Myers, he also slandered Junior Hicks, and so these two folks are no longer around to defend themselves. So I do have a blog article that adequately titled "Dead Men Tell No Tales," because it's easy to slander somebody when they're not around to defend themselves, and which is what Brandon Fugel is doing in his self-serving role as the new custodian of the ranch, and in his push for his TV show, which is all bunk. So yeah, it's not just sad; it's infuriating. It makes me mad to see them do that. Again, human manipulation, human deception. Brandon Fugel was right in the middle of that.
And so, what did he say about Junior Hicks?
So what he was claiming was that perhaps that Junior Hicks didn't get the story right. That he was, I don't know if you remember, he was interviewed by Brandon Fugel's crew a few times, and those videos, I was able to get access to those videos. So essentially, he was trying to say, hey, Junior Hicks, you can't really believe him. I think he has some ulterior motive for the same reason he was trying to use Garth Myers and Dr. Salisbury's Mormon background as a reason for why they would make stuff up. He's basically saying they made stuff up, which is not true.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've you know this. I went up to see Dr. Salisbury's collection at the University of Utah Special Archives, and I mean, I spent days and days up there just going through. I mean, he has got, I mean, hundreds of, probably 100,000 pages of his work and his time when he worked for NASA and his time when he, was working for Utah State. And he was such a, in my opinion, when you look at all of his correspondence and things, he was a very good human being who wanted the truth. And he knew he had gone through specific points in his time in the UFO subject where he'd been manipulated and led down potentially dangerous roads. And if you come to Utah and you want to spend time up there and look at some of these things, it's pretty profound. And I think even Junior, towards the end of his life, understood that he was at points in his life manipulated by the Bigelow crew. And I'll never forget, one of the most heart-wrenching things for me in all of this Skinwalker drama was to be with Junior. I was interviewing him, and he had mentioned, this was right when The Hunt for the Skinwalker came out, and he had mentioned that even though he was featured in the movie, that George Knapp or Brandon, nobody involved with Skinwalker, old or new, invited him to the movie premiere, and he was heartbroken.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty telling.
Yes, it
Pretty
is.
telling.
Yeah.
No,
is.
in my interaction with Dr. Frank Salisbury, I'm completely in agreement with you. And if you read his rewrite of the book, you'll see it. He doesn't varnish the truth. He says, my beliefs are sometimes get in the way. Sometimes I truly want to believe that there's something going on. But here's the evidence from what I've uncovered. And, he wasn't making stuff up. He was just telling the story. And, he left it up to the reader to figure it out for themselves. And that's really, solid investigation. That's what a scientific investigator does. And I can see that he was a true scientist, but at the same time, his Mormon beliefs, there were conflicts there, which I think anybody who is of a religious faith, who's also a scientist, struggles with. I think that's just something normal.
And I think that was such an interesting thing, and a very touching thing in a way, to have conversations with Junior, and I was lucky enough, I did get to speak to Dr. Salisbury before he passed away, and to look at all of his work. It was just like there was that struggle, and that was they weren't afraid to talk about that, and how do they frame this in their perspective. with their religious upbringing and things. And that's a really interesting uh, point, and a very personal point, and something that we should be respectful of when it comes to people like that are very genuine. And so for me to see, now we've got this big push to promote the LDS religion and create some sort of, it's like this new occult practice, and with regard to Skinwalker Ranch, and then we see the Mormon mysticism and people promoting all of that. And I mean, what are your thoughts on that, and why that would be ramping up right now?
Yeah, I don't know specifically. I would assume that it's Brandon Fugel pushing that. But science and religion don't mix. So you can't say on the one hand, as the History Channel keeps telling everybody, this is a science-based show, right? The Secrets of Skinwalker Ranch. You can't push science at the same time try to promote mysticism or religion. The two do not mix. Again, it goes back to where somehow people within this field, within the subject, think that they're exempt from the science, from all the scientific principles that everybody else has to adhere to, right? You don't see folks at Harvard conducting scientific investigations and saying, I need to let my Sunday school class review this, right? It's peer review with other folks who are like-minded scientists. Religion should not be part of it. Belief should not be part of it. You can either park your beliefs at the door, or simply don't call yourself a scientist. They don't mix.
And then, I mean, that I absolutely believe that, but it is interesting to me, like I said, to be here and to have grown up in the church. Depending on where you are in the world, you've got the church, which could be the Catholic Church or the LDS Church or whatever we've got going on. But I never, there was never talk of the paranormal, of UFOs. This just was not. That wasn't even. It just wasn't. It's not where we go. It's not where the LDS Church is. I know I have several friends who are active members, that are involved in the church hierarchy. That's not where anything has gone. And so then you've got somebody like Joe Firmage who comes out, who's, we've got some questions about Firmage and some of the things that he's believed. I'm glad that he's running for president now. But, you've got him saying that he's equating this UFO experience to Joseph Smith and what Joseph Smith saw. And so, again, where was the inception of that myth, potentially, that we're linking UFOs to the LDS faith?
Sure. Well, I mean, linkages can be made when you are basing something on faith, right? I mean, even in the Bible, UFO believers will point to Ezekiel's wheels and say that was a UFO. Or when this angel came down from heaven, he came down on a UFO. So it's easy when you have a belief-based system to be able to weave into that whatever you want. It's just belief, right? There's no proof. You don't have to prove what you're saying. You just have to make an assertion, and if people believe it, then great.
Yeah, it is interesting, but again, I will raise a red flag personally to see the way that the Mormon aspect is being inserted into the Skinwalker narrative, because it's, again, like you said, there's science, and these people are claiming that this is a scientific research project, and yet the first episode, they're going over the ranch and they're saying a prayer. I mean, okay, really? Give me a break. And I mean, just there's so many things that don't add up. But I mean, it just goes to show that we have to ask questions about things. And, I feel like the occult has been one of those things, again, that has been used kind of to promote, like, making something mystical, like the Nazis. I mean, when we look at some of the things that have happened in UFO history, and how we're looking at, Hitler and the mysticism and his belief in the occult, and then all of these secret UFO craft that they're testing, and you look at the way that has almost become something sacred and mystical, and almost an excuse for what Hitler did. I mean, I know I'm going out on a kind of a ledge here, but is this just another way for a certain group of people to make this a romantic subject that appeals to people like that? Does that make sense?
Sure, absolutely it does. I mean, when you had, if you look at the history of occult in the Third Reich, mysticism was being used, belief in Arianism and, strange ties to Nepal and all these other exotic places as, the Aryan race. All of this stuff was bunk, but it was being pushed on a national scale to people that believed it. And there was nothing to back it up, but it got believed. It became part of their culture, became part of their society. Hitler was an occult nut, so was Himmler, all these other Nazi leaders, and it really was being used for manipulation, right? It's to manipulate people into believing that they were part of a super race. No, you weren't, but here's the belief to try to back that up. And why the Mormon Church or Fugel would be using Mormonism to try to push skinwalkers a special place. I'm sorry, it's not a special place. It's a place that's built on myth, that was created on myth. And yet they're trying to push it as paranormal central with no proof whatsoever, trying to tie it back historically when there are no historical records.
Right.
If they can't, they'll make it up. They'll lie about it.
Clearly.
So, but like I said, if you're just in it for the noise, if you enjoy the noise, if it excites you, you ignore all of those red flags that pop up and you focus just on the noise, right? It's just part of human nature, right? In the absence of information, you'll fill it in with whatever excites you, right? Whatever is your belief system. And, if you're a critical thinker, you'll say, well, wait, that doesn't make a lot of sense. But the problem is we're overwhelmed by the noise. Everywhere, when you turn on the TV, it's all noise. You go on Twitter, it's all noise. Facebook, all noise. The critical, rational level approach to UFOs is not being pushed on social media or in the mass media. Maybe it's being taken seriously by this new office that the Department of Defense set up. We don't know. We're not privy to it. We don't know their protocols. We don't know their workings. We don't know if they set up the proper channels of communication as they say they do. All we got is a 12-page report that says, yeah, we're on the job. We're sort of doing these things that we said we're going to do, but we can't really show you anything. That doesn't satisfy anybody. So in the absence of information, what do? You look for another source of information. And there's plenty of that, plenty out there to keep your attention.
And so do you think that the government would pull in, people that weren't involved with the government to study this? And how seriously, would they utilize a civilian group of people?
Yeah, I think they would. I think they have. I think that, going back to Jack's research with NICAP, I think NICAP was probably a creation of the CIA. So they created a civilian agency to push their own narratives and for their own purposes. I think they go to UFO conferences. I think they're probably on the board of MUFON now, whatever. Saying, not accusing any particular person, just saying that it makes sense that intelligence agencies would manipulate civilian organizations for their own purposes. It's happened before. It's not the first time.
So do you think if the intelligence community is reaching out to civilians and saying that they want to work with civilians, do you think that is a manipulation, or do you think there would be anything of merit there?
Well, you mean if they're doing it overtly or they're doing it covertly?
Overtly.
Oh, overtly? I don't know. I think the CIA probably has enough of their own scientists where they don't have to really reach out to some third party organization, especially if, because they would have to make sure that those folks have the proper level of clearance, right? So do I see the CIA, for example, working with the Galileo project? No, not really. I don't. Not overtly, maybe covertly. For the same reason I didn't see the DIA working with Bigelow, because they didn't do it overtly. They did it covertly, right? They did it behind the scenes, and it wasn't until 2017 when the truth came out that, hey, one of our intelligence agencies was pushing UFO investigation. because of some guy at DIA who had an experience at Skinwalker Ranch, allegedly.
And so what, not to beat a dead horse, but I will because I'm good that way, but like, why would they use Skinwalker Ranch? I mean, we know they weren't doing any investigating. I mean, it was just a,
I
handful of
think
guys
I
going around
think
with guns, but
honestly, I think it was a social experiment
okay.
of creating something out of nothing. Can we take this ranch in Utah and make it sound like it's paranormal central and get people to believe this hook, line, and sinker? And lo and behold, they have,
Right,
right?
and then you can just
Lo,
monitor people and social media and stories that they're sharing and then you can watch them go to the periphery of the ranch and all these things. And so that really is interesting and it's a great yeah, it is a great social experiment.
and it's not just a social experiment. It could be that on the ranch, they were they were actually doing other things. Maybe they were trying to test out non-lethal weaponry. We don't know. What is all this that went on with the Havana syndrome and people getting brain injuries in foreign countries, and somehow that got tied into Skinwalker Ranch by Mr. Gary Nolan.
Yeah, what do you make of that?
That clown, Gary Nolan. I'm sorry, that's the only word I can have for him. He has, yeah, he has scientific credentials, but the fact that he has immersed himself in this field and has pushed so many questionable beliefs and made all these assertions, either he is in on this con or he is unfortunately a useful idiot. So I don't really know which category he's in, but I do know that anything he says is suspect. It's simply suspect.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that. And it is interesting that, yeah, I mean, the whole thing is just interesting, and it's unfortunate because there are good people that are getting taken advantage of, and that's most unfortunate. And hopefully, we can educate people about that and some of the dangers and pitfalls of being associated with these people. And it was interesting when Nolan first came into the field. I mean, there were a handful of people that were what the young guns, I guess you would call them, and they came into this and they were, very enamored with these people and wanted to do, hey, do my brain scan, here, let me give you my blood, let's do all of these things, and it was interesting. Like, I don't know if I would.
If you become enamored of a personality, you may just be in a cult.
Right.
Yeah, if you can't use critical thinking to analyze somebody's statements and assertions, regardless of their credentials, to see if there's truth behind it or it's just made up BS, then you may just be in a cult. Or if not in a cult, you're letting the noise overwhelm you and your critical thinking is being laid by the wayside.
Absolutely, yeah. It's unfortunate, but what do you make of the MRI scans that were released from a couple people at Skinwalker Ranch? Is that just a game?
I don't know what it is, but the fact that it's tied to Skinwalker is just another huge red flag. And again, when you ignore the red flags and you just push them aside, in my experience, for all the time I've been investigating the subject and I've seen the human hand of deception, you're being manipulated, right? You cannot ignore red flags in this field. They're glaring, they have to be investigated, they have to be explained, and you can't just let somebody get away with it just because they want to say something that makes your belief bells go off and you ignore the things that they're saying that may not be true. Right? You have to be a critical thinker and you have to be able to dig for the truth. And that means setting your beliefs aside and focusing on the truth. The
Absolutely. And so,
personalities.
and why do people, involved with specific stories, why do they like double down and instead of giving themselves a little bit of wiggle room to, okay, well, we're studying this, but maybe we're not, maybe we're wrong. You
Because
don't.
doubling down in today's society is the thing to do,
Okay.
right? And you can go all the way back to Nazi Germany, right? To see that their the guy that was pushing Goebbels, who was pushing propaganda for them, said, you just have to keep repeating the same thing over and over again. Eventually, they're going to believe it, even if it's not true. We've seen that. We've seen that, and I'm sorry for all your right-leaning guests on the show, but we saw that happen with Donald Trump pushing this idea that he won the election. BS. He didn't win the election. He lost. But if you say it enough times and it gets repeated by enough of your cohorts, eventually people start to believe it. So it becomes this this propaganda pushing manipulation technique that can be traced all the way back to the Nazis. They use it to great effect. It's being used in today's society.
And it's very sad to see. And that, I mean, again, you look at marketing, you look at the way we use that to manipulate people, and it's all so interesting. But I appreciate your take, and I will say that I still remember running into you at the MUFON Symposium. And you were there, and this was after you had left and things, and it was interesting to watch people in MUFON watch you and to see how gracefully you just, you went for it. You were there, and you were right in your element. That was really cool.
That must have been the one in New Jersey.
It certainly was.
Yes.
Cherry Hill.
Yeah, and so it was. But that the MUFON conference is a circus. The UFO community is a circus. I'm out of the circus. I don't need to go back. But the reason I'm on the fringe and I'm looking in is because I still find it intriguing that how much this field can be used for deception and manipulation. And again, I'm sitting there. I'm going to start popping popcorn around June 15th of 2024 and wait for that report to come out and digest it. Hopefully it's hundreds or thousands of pages long. And if it's done right, get on UFO Twitter and watch the meltdown begin.
Well, it's going to be an interesting game it'll be interesting to see the repercussions. And but I appreciate you being here, and I love chatting with you. You've got so many important takes on this subject that we need to pay attention to, because at the end of the day, you're not disinformation agent. I'm not a disinformation agent. We're people that have seen a lot in this subject, and we want the truth, and we deserve the truth. And so I appreciate
you and Jack are doing a great service to the community. So keep at it. It's very important.
Thank you. We've got some good stuff on the horizon, so it'll be wonderful. And everyone can find you at historydeceived.blogspot.com. And I love reading everything that you've done over the years. So thank you so much. And then you can also download both of your books at your website, right?
Absolutely. Yep. Free downloads. The first one's Anachronism. It covers the 1946 ghost rockets. And the other one is the Roswell Deception, which covers the flying saucer summer of 47, which includes Kenneth Arnold and Roswell and Maury Island, everything that happened during that time frame.
That's such a great book. I love that book. So thank you very, very much for being here, and we will touch base soon. So thanks, James. Have a wonderful weekend.
You too. Thanks, Erica.
Thank you.
Thanks to your guest.
Thanks. So all of you, thank you for listening. This has been an interesting conversation tonight, as always, it was exactly what I would expect from somebody like James. Please make sure you go to his blog spot and read the incredible work that he has put forward over the years. I have to commend somebody who has come into this like I did, somebody who wanted to believe that there was more there. I've been through a learning process. I'm not saying that there isn't something worthy of study. I know that there is, but we have to get through some of this garbage before we can find the truth, and I appreciate that about the people I work with now. I want to give a shout out to Barry Greenwood, who's under the weather tonight. I hope you feel better. And I want to thank Jack Brewer for all of his amazing work for Expanding Frontiers Research. You can go to expandingfrontiersresearch.org to donate to our work. It helps us do FOIA requests, keep the website up, and keep more pressure on people that are promoting false narratives. We've got some great things, like I mentioned a million times, on the horizon. So go there. We are going to be interviewing Mark Pilkington, and that will be on the show next Friday if all goes as planned. I'm really looking forward to that. So all of you guys, thank you so much for being here. Troubled Minds, nice to see you. Simon Fly, Vancouver guy, Peter, thank you for all that you do. And Mario, thank you for being here every show and supporting me and helping me behind the scenes. You guys rock. Have a wonderful weekend, and I will I'm not going to stay out of trouble, but I will catch you guys next Friday. Take care.